want this to be a little interactive, so to the extent that somebody's got a great idea or has a lousy idea that they discovered quickly didn't work, I think we can all benefit. So quickly, how many of you were new as of January 1 to the auditor's office? So there's a lot of seasoned professionals here. Good. This won't take long, and you can get to the hospitality room quickly. If, of course, I can operate this. All right, we're going to talk about, we're going to break it into three basic topics: calling the meeting, notices, and then recording the meeting. So the first thing to do, for those of you who are new, is to become familiar with the statutes, because there are statutes that help you know when people can meet and under what circumstances they can have special meetings. The Commissioner statute is 36-2-2. The Council statute is 36-2-3. Legislative procedures is 36-2-4. You need to be familiar with the open door law, which is 514-1.5. And then there's that nasty little statute 5-3-1, which requires publication in the newspaper of certain ads, notices of meetings. Okay. Meetings of the county commissioners. They have to meet regularly by statute, at least once a month, and they can meet at other times as they decide they need to conduct business. And as most of you know who have commissioners' offices in your buildings, they're frequently meeting every day or every other day, sometimes into the night, whatever. The dates of their regular meeting is supposed to be established by statute, and there is a change this year, effective July 1, so it'll be effective for next year. They have until February 1 to establish their schedule of regular meetings. Open door notice is required of commissioners' regularly scheduled meetings. Commissioners may also call special meetings, and those may be called by any commissioner. The county auditor may call a meeting. If there is no county auditor, the county clerk can call the meeting. And if there's neither a clerk or an auditor, then the county recorder can call the meeting. And there are special notice requirements for that. Essentially 6 days notice, not by publication, but at least delivered in writing. The notice has to include a specific statement of the purpose for which they're meeting, and you can't conduct any unrelated business at the meeting. So if you call a special meeting to deal with, say, highway culvert, the commissioners can't all of a sudden decide to do something about that bridge over on the other side of the county. County councils also have particular meeting requirements. County councils have 2 regular meetings during the year. One is their organizational meeting, and the second meeting is the meeting at which they adopt the budget. Every other meeting is a special meeting of the county council. In Lake and St. Joseph counties, the county council is also the county legislative body, and so they can have regularly scheduled meetings that don't conflict with the meetings of the county executive. So calling the special meetings of the county council, which is virtually every other time the county council meets, other than in January and in September, October, when they adopt the budget. The county auditor can call it, the president of the council can call it, or a majority of the members of the council can call it. And this is where a lot of folks get tripped up, because you have to give handwritten notice, or not handwritten, it has written notice, it could be typed. I guess you don't call it typing anymore when you put it on a computer. To each council member at least 48 hours before the meeting, and then it has to be published in the newspaper at least 1 day before the meeting. And since most special county council meetings are usually additional appropriation hearings, you take care of that notice requirement with the publication of your notice of hearing. These requirements don't apply to emergency meetings. Emergency meetings, which are true emergencies of either the commissioners or of the council, there's no particular notice required, but you've got to have a particular, a genuine emergency, something that threatens life, public health, safety, or welfare. It just can't be because somebody forgot something. Okay, open door notice requirements. These 48 hours, not including Saturdays, Sundays, and legal holidays. And the Indiana Code actually has a list of legal holidays. So it's not the legal holidays that your county determines, it's the legal holidays that are set forth in that statute. So you think about, Memorial Day weekend coming up. If you're gonna have a meeting, you need to make sure that you don't count in your notice requirements Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. So say a meeting on Tuesday, you're gonna have to do the notice on Thursday, probably, because you can't include Saturday, Sunday, or Monday. The notice has to say where you're gonna meet, when you're gonna meet. It does not have to identify the purpose of the meeting, not just a regular open door notice. If the body, the commissioners or the council or the drainage board or any of the other entities that might be involved use an agenda, you have to post the agenda. But the agenda does not have to be posted 48 hours in advance of the meeting. You can just put the agenda up right before you convene the meeting. Where do you post the notice? If the commissioners or the council actually have an office, you post it at their office. If they don't have an office, then you just post it at the building where the meeting is to occur. You don't have to post it at the door to the room, just at the building. Maybe more convenient to post it at the door, but there's no violation if you post it, say, on the front door of the courthouse as opposed to the door of the room where the meeting's to take place. You can also do overkill and post it there and there, but that's up to you. You all are busy people. Providing notice to the media. You have to provide open door notice to the media if, and I'm not moving this along, I'm sorry. See, I get busy. Boop. Yeah. If media have requested before December, on or before December 31st of the previous year to receive open door notices, then you have to provide them the open door notice. The governing body, this is fairly recent language, is supposed to determine what manner you're supposed to do. It used to be up to whoever was going to post the notice, and now they've, in 2011, I think they changed the statute to say the governing body is supposed to determine this. Whether you're going to give notice by mail or fax, or if you can send an email, then you can send it by email. But you can pick one of these three ways. So the governing body is supposed to have a motion or a resolution or something that says, we're going to send notices by email, or we're going to send notices by fax. Then there's the lovely publication of notices under 5-3-1. And this requirement pops up all over the Indiana Code. Generally speaking, if there are 2 newspapers published in the county, and that doesn't mean free circulars or the free newspaper that shows up every Thursday, but actual newspapers for which there's at least 50% paid subscriptions, then you have to publish in both those newspapers. If there's only 1 newspaper published in the county, you only have to publish in the 1 county. And last time I knew, there was only maybe 1 or 2 counties that had no newspapers published. And the statute is silent as to what they're to do, but I think it's probably prudent to publish in a newspaper that circulates in the county. That's certainly kind of the rules for other political subdivisions. Types of notice that require publication, in addition to the notice of the county council meeting that we already spoke about. public hearings, one time at least 10 days before the meeting. Now, this is a public hearing, not a public meeting, a public hearing. And the statute will usually say hearing. Typically, that will be additional appropriations for the most part. The budget hearing has its own particular publication requirements. It must be published 2 times, 1 week apart. The DLGF will be sending out a calendar later in May or early June that will actually prescribe the deadlines, but under the statute, the first notice must be published before September 14th, and the second one must be published before September 21st. So those are things to go ahead and put in your calendar as things you need to get done. For those of you who have dailies, maybe it's not as big a deal. For those of you whose papers publish less than on a daily basis, you need to think about that. But since you all have been doing this for 5 months now, at a minimum, I think you probably know what your newspapers require in terms of newspaper notice. Invitations to bid on, could be a public works project, could be a formal invitation where you're selecting, you're going to be seeking, say, $100,000 worth of police car, or sheriff's cars. 1 week, they have to be published 2 times, 1 week apart, and the second publication must be at least 7 days before you're going to open the bids. So now we'll talk about actually operating the meeting. The council or the commissioners may want to adopt rules of procedure. It's more typical with cities and towns, but there's certainly no reason why a county council or board of commissioners can't establish procedures. Maybe if we're going to have a resolution, we want to see it so many days in advance. If we're going to have an ordinance, we want to see it so many days in advance. Since you only have to meet once a month, but they want to meet more than once a month, their rules of procedure could say we'll meet the 1st and 3rd Mondays, or we'll meet the 1st and 3rd Wednesdays, or 2nd and 4th Tuesdays, et cetera and so forth. Beyond the statutory requirements, what procedures they might want for calling a special meeting, you know, beyond, say, a written notice, or you may say it's sufficient if the county auditor calls everybody on the phone or sends an email, as long as they get a response back or something like that. How motions will be made. The rules of procedure could prescribe the order of business. And the rules of procedure could say whether you're going to allow ordinances or resolutions to be read by title, or whether you're going to require the entire ordinance to be read into the minutes. Now, maybe when it's a short ordinance, reading the entire ordinance in, but I once had to read a 37-page bond ordinance into the minutes, page by page by page. We were there like probably 30 minutes just reading that ordinance in. So think about those things. Order of business. This is not prescribed. This is just, again, a best practice, suggestions. You may all already have an order of business. It will frequently show up on your agenda. Might have a call to order, the roll call, in order to establish that you've got a quorum or you don't have a quorum. Approval of the minutes from the previous meeting. Any petitions or comments from the public. A lot of folks have an opportunity, have like a 20, 30 minutes where they allow members of the public to come forward and talk to the council or the commissioners about anything they want. You don't have to have that. It's just something a lot of folks do. Approval of claims, and that's generally going to be, depending on whether it's going to be a long approval or short approval. Maybe you'll put that at the beginning of the meeting. Maybe you want to put it at the end of the meeting. If you're going to have a public hearing, you probably want to have that before you do other business, but you're not required to. You might want to then do old business, then new business, introduction of ordinances and resolutions, anything else, and then you'd adjourn. In addition to the rules of procedure, there are rules and requirements for voting. This is generally found under the Legislative Procedures chapter, which is 36-2-4. A majority of all the elected members is required to have a quorum, unless the county council has, by a 2/3 vote, determined that it wants more than a simple majority for a quorum. So for a council meeting, that's going to be 4 people. Commissioners are going to have 2 people. Kind of hard to have a meeting with only 1 person. A majority vote means a majority of all the elected officials, not just all 4. If it's a 3-1 vote and there are only 4 people there, you don't have a majority vote. 2/3 vote means a 2/3 vote of all the elected members, not just everybody present, but who's there. Generally speaking, a majority vote is required to pass an ordinance, unless the statute governing that particular subject requires a greater vote. There are some zoning ordinance requirements that have a greater than a majority, but most things, a simple majority will pass an ordinance. There's a notice that it just says ordinance. It doesn't say resolution. So perhaps in those rules of procedure that we talked about, maybe you allow resolutions to be adopted by less than a majority. And again, if there are only 2 commissioners present, they can't agree. Then whatever they're discussing gets tabled. Secret ballot votes may not be taken. Absolutely not. Votes should be recorded. It could be unanimous. It could be 7-1 or 6-1. I guess you'd not have a 7-1 vote. The rules of procedure may or may not provide for calling for a roll call vote. Again, that's going to be at the discretion of the body as to whether they've got any rules of procedure. A lot of folks just simply adopt Robert's rules or some other standard rules of procedure as their rules of procedure for their entity. And if your council or your commissioners have done that, you want to become familiar with those rules too. Suspending the rules. Unanimous consent of all the members present is required to pass an ordinance on the same day or at the same meeting at which the ordinance is introduced. Notice it says ordinance, not resolution, not motion. So if you've got 5 members of the council there, all 5 of them have to agree that they will introduce the ordinance and at least consider the ordinance. In fact, in this case, to pass the ordinance. So if it's then a 4-1, the ordinance didn't pass, and it would be deemed defeated. This provision does not apply to a zoning ordinance or to an additional appropriation ordinance. So you can do those in one meeting. You all know that you are the clerk, or the scrivener, or the recorder of all meetings of the County Board of Commissioners and the County Council. And now, I don't know whether any of you have been excluded from executive sessions or things like that. I know that clerk treasurers in cities and towns, some of them have experienced that, where the council will say, we're going to go to an executive session, and by the way, you can leave. Well, how do you do your duty of recording that meeting? Because an executive session is still a meeting if you're excluded from the meeting. There's no case law. There's no statute. If you're excluded from the meeting, I would make sure that somebody who's attending the executive session takes memoranda of what's going on so that at least that part of the open door statute isn't violated. Sure.
I've always been told by our county attorney and my commissioner, when I used to sit in all this executive meeting, that we do not take minutes during that. For the purpose that it's not a public transparency.
Well, okay, the question is, or the issue is, whether or not you have to take minutes during executive session. You don't have to take minutes. You don't ever have to take minutes, and we'll get to that in a second here. But you must keep a memoranda of the meeting. At a minimum, you have to identify who's there, who's not there, and for an executive session, you have to have an affirmation that says, we only talked about X, whatever the statutory reason is for the executive session, and we didn't talk about anything else. No, because that's before the meeting. You have to have the affirmation after you have the meeting. So, I mean, it could be as simple as we met in executive session to discuss, and then have the statutory citation, then have a statement that no other business was conducted, and then it's signed. And that would be your affirmation, and that would be your memoranda of the meeting. But you have to have, at a minimum, the memoranda, because this is still a meeting under the open door law. It's just a meeting from which members of the public are excluded. For an executive session, it's okay. It's the memoranda is under 514(1.55), and you would ask me that because I don't have the statute in front of me, but it's 5. And then in 6.1, which is the executive session provision, I think it's subsection D, it might be subsection E, which affirmatively states that you have to have this affirmation that you didn't talk about, you only talked about what you'd posted a notice for, and you didn't talk about anything else. So, and then I would put that in your, in your minute book or whatever, that we had an executive session, this is all we talked about, and we didn't talk about anything else. And then you've got, if there'd be a dispute later, say, maybe more likely well, who knows? You could have the one commissioner say, well, no, we talked about X, Y, Z, but at least you've got an affirmation, that's generally speaking signed under penalties of perjury that, no, we didn't talk about that. So. Okay, I will repeat the question. She's had minutes subpoenaed as part of ongoing litigation, and she's asked whether or not her notes from which she derived the minutes could be subpoenaed also, or which may have helped her with the minutes, whether those are public records. Now, the public records statute has an exception for notes, diaries, or journal, the equivalent of that. So if I were the county attorney, I would argue that you don't have to disclose that, but the rules of discovery may require you to provide those notes in the course of the litigation, because the statute, the public records statute, even recognizes that the rules of discovery are going to trump the Public Records Act. Well, if you think you're going to have litigation, and then that I guess gets to one of the questions about how detailed should your minutes be. And I've listened to presentations where the suggestion is made that you have very, very bare minutes. But I've also heard where you should transcribe, you should have a recording made. I think there's a happy medium there, so long as you recognize that if you're transcribing, that recording is still a public record and may be requested for disclosure, and there's probably not an exception for that recording under the Public Records Act. I will tell you as an attorney that it helps if the minutes have more than A moved, B seconded, no discussion, done. But on the other hand, you don't, if there's 5 hours of discussion and back and forth between the commissioners or the council, you certainly don't have to record 5 hours of, But you could indicate perhaps that the discussion continued for several hours, or these topics, and just sort of identify the topics. Generally speaking, I don't know, in Indianapolis, the City County Council, which is both city and county, they've transcribed for years, and then it's weeks before you actually see them. On the other hand, both the Open Door Law and the Public Records Act say these things need to be available within a reasonable time. So what's a reasonable time? If it's the budget hearing, you know, where it does go on for hours, maybe a couple of weeks is really, really good. 6 months may not be so good. Any questions? Did I finish? Oh, yes, as we said, the Open Door Law doesn't require minutes. It does require a memoranda. And a memoranda at the minimum includes the date, the time, and the place of the meeting, the members of the governing body who were present, the members who weren't present, the general substance of what you talked about, what was talked about. So, and maybe you just attach the agenda as the general substance. And if there were votes taken, what the votes were. It doesn't have to always be 4-3 or 5-2 or unanimous. You may have voice votes on most of your, and then you can just, you know, voice vote, unanimous or majority. If you do have roll call votes, then you need to record those by member. Memoranda has to be available with reasonable promptness, so that the public can know what you're doing. Minutes, if any, are to be available for public inspection and copying. And this is interesting because this would imply that memoranda don't have to be available for public inspection copying, but I wouldn't try that. And again, there's no requirement that you transcribe or that you record or that you have a court reporter there to take down every word. It's what you feel comfortable doing. And then someone suggested to me that the most important best practice is to delegate to someone else the responsibility for doing the minutes. So, any suggestions, comments, good suggestions? I talked with somebody about, I have a desk calendar at the office that identifies when things need to be published, and then it sort of backs into that when it needs to go to the paper, et cetera, and so forth. You all publish a lot of notices, you post a lot of notices, so if there's a great trick out there for doing that, share it, or share it among yourselves. If there's a lousy trick that, you know, just you tried it and it was just a disaster, let us know that too.